At 4:22 hours, Philippine Sea, the water was calm, the sky quiet, and the U.S. Navy's USS Gerald R. Ford Carrier Strike Group was moving north at 18 knots. FA-18S slept on the flight deck. E-2D Hawkeyes were tucked into their shelters, and sailors were finishing the night shift. To most, it felt like an ordinary patrol, but deep beneath the surface, a silent hunter was closing in. This wasn't a drill. This wasn't a test. This was China's deadliest submarine, operating outside its usual waters, and it had locked onto the most powerful warship in the world. The first warning signs. 7 minutes later, at 4:29 hours, something unusual happened. Aboard the USS Pinckney, a destroyer escorting the Ford, the AN/SQR-19 towed array sonar detected a faint signature. At first, it looked like thermal noise, maybe even a school of fish, but as the pattern repeated, the audio technician froze. Contact: possible submerged vessel, bearing 236, unknown depth. The ship's combat information center went silent. Another technician leaned closer to the headphones. That's no biological, that's prop cavitation. Low frequency, too low for diesel, too steady for a civilian vessel. Within moments, the CIC chief made the call: report potential submarine contact to the strike group. The message rippled through the carrier group instantly. One by one, radars shifted, sonar suites recalibrated. The Ford's command deck lit up with notifications. The US knew exactly what this meant. China had sent a submarine into the Philippine Sea, and this close to the Ford, it wasn't gathering intel, it was preparing for an engagement. The submarine reveals itself. At 04:34 hours, the readings became unmistakable. A distinct acoustic signature emerged from below the thermocline, the exact signature of China's Type 093B Shang-class nuclear attack submarine, one of Beijing's newest and quietest underwater predators. The Ford's captain read the report aloud: hostile submarine, nuclear-powered, bearing steady, closing distance. The Shang-class had been feared by analysts for years, faster than China's older submarines, quieter than most Western nations expected, and armed with a weapon that could shift the balance of naval warfare. The YJ-18B anti-ship missile, capable of being fired from underwater, the Ford strike group was now in the crosshairs. The silent approach. Inside the Chinese submarine, according to intelligence later obtained, the atmosphere was ice cold and silent. Red lights illuminated the control room. The captain watched the American formation through digital sonar mapping. He muttered one phrase: target, US carrier, prepare firing solution. His sonar officer entered commands. Their computers tracked the Ford's position, speed, and distance. The firing arc slowly tightened. Back above the surface, the US forces still didn't know the submarine's exact intent, but the fact that a Shang-class was running silent, deep, and cutting directly toward the carrier wasn't normal. At 04:37 hours, the commander of the strike group issued the alert: set condition 2. All escort ships activate ASW protocols. In seconds, helicopters spun up on the decks, sonobuoys were prepared, P-8 Poseidon aircraft were alerted, destroyers spread out into a wide protective screen. Because one thing was clear: whatever the submarine wanted, it wasn't peaceful. The first aggressive act. At 04:39 hours, the submarine made its first hostile move. The sonar operator aboard the USS Pinckney sat back in shock. Sir, the submarine just accelerated, full sprint, bearing directly toward the carrier. Submarines don't sprint unless they are evading, they are repositioning for attack, or they are preparing to launch. This was an attack run immediately. The destroyer USS Thomas Hudner moved to intercept, pivoting at 28 knots. Its ANS/QQ-89 sonar system locked onto the Shang-class on the bridge. Enemy submarine maneuvering aggressively. Distance: 11,000 yards and closing. But then came the moment that changed everything: the torpedo tube event. At 04:41 hours, the Chinese submarine opened one of its torpedo tube doors. Sonar detected it instantly, a distinct metallic echo. The warning went out: torpedo tube opening, hostile intent confirmed. On the Ford's deck, sirens echoed. Sailors rushed to stations. Pilots sprinted toward their aircraft. Inside the carrier's combat direction center, the screen flashed red. Potential torpedo launch detected, hostile submarine, 9,500 yards and closing. This was no longer a standoff. This was an attack. The US response begins. At 04:43 hours, the first American countermeasure was deployed. The destroyer USS Pinckney launched a Mark 54 torpedo into the water, not to hit, but to drive the submarine deeper and force it off its attack line. Simultaneously, helicopters from the USS Ford MH-60R Romeos lifted off with dipping sonar and torpedo capability. Above the ocean, the rotary wing pilot scanned the waves. Below the ocean, the Chinese submarine captain watched American assets scramble into motion, but he wasn't stopping. He ordered, "Prepare missile launch YJ-18B, 1 round." The crew confirmed. Inside US sonar rooms, the operators felt their stomachs drop. The YJ-18B was one of the most feared weapons in China's arsenal, launched underwater, traveling quietly for most of its flight, then accelerating to Mach 3 in its terminal stage. A direct hit could cripple or sink even a US aircraft carrier. At 0445 hours, the Chinese submarine rose slightly in depth, shifting into launch position. And then, something happened that neither side expected. 4:45 hours, the Philippine Sea. The Shang-class submarine had risen to launch depth. The US carrier strike group was fully alert, and the next 30 seconds would determine whether the world woke up to a headline announcing a naval disaster or a miracle. Inside the Chinese submarine, the missile officer's finger hovered over the firing switch. Launch authorization confirmed. Tube 1 ready, opening flood valves. The captain prepared to give the final order, but then a sudden shock rolled through the submarine, a violent jolt, a deep metallic groan. Systems flickered. The navigation officer yelled, "Sir, we've been illuminated. High intensity. Multiple American pings." The Shang class had been hit by something it didn't expect, an American ASW saturation attack. Moments earlier, the USS Pinckney and USS Thomas Hudner had coordinated a rare maneuver, a simultaneous triple-frequency sonar blast designed to overload the Chinese submarine's sensors. This wasn't a weapon, it was a tactical blindfold. For several seconds, the submarine was effectively blind. The captain slammed his fist onto the console. "Dive, dive, dive now!" But before they could escape, something even worse happened. The US counterstrike begins, 0447 hours. Above the ocean, 2 MH-60R Seahawks hovered low. Sonobuoys splashed into the water in rapid sequence, forming a circular trap around the submarine. The aircraft transmitted, "Target locked, hostile submarine contained, grid B7 established." At the same time, miles to the south, a US Navy P-8 Poseidon surveillance aircraft banked hard and entered the engagement zone. Its message was brief: commencing active tracking, weapon systems online. Inside the aircraft, operators watched the submarine on their screens, a bright red icon pulsing under the thermocline, struggling to regain control. Because as soon as the Shang class attempted a descent, the US sprung the next part of the trap. The Poseidon dropped a Mk-54 air-launched torpedo directly ahead of the submarine's travel vector. This time, the captain of the Chinese submarine didn't panic. He knew the torpedo was not yet on a kill trajectory. He whispered, "American deterrent strike, they want to drive us off." But then the sonar officer shouted, "Sir, airborne contact, multiple fast movers approaching." The captain's eyes went wide. This wasn't just deterrence, this was US dominance, and it was just beginning. The carrier joins the fight, 0449 hours. On the flight deck of the USS Gerald R. Ford, steam plumed from the catapults. The deck crew cleared lanes, pilots strapped in. The air boss gave the call, "Launch the Eagles." 2 FA-18E Super Hornets roared off the deck, their afterburners turning the early morning sky into a torch. These jets weren't needed to hit the submarine, that was the job of the helicopters and destroyers. The Hornets were airborne to protect the strike group from any potential Chinese surface or air reinforcements. Because a submarine attack rarely happens alone, their launch sent a message across the sea. The US carrier was now fully awake. The Chinese missile launch, 0451 hours. Hundreds of feet below the ocean's surface, the Chinese submarine captain steadied himself. He knew he had only two options: retreat and report failure to Beijing, fire a single missile, a warning shot, and escape before the Americans retaliated. Neither choice was good, but one would preserve honor. He made his decision. "Prepare to launch YJ-18B. Single round, fire on my mark." The weapon officers worked quickly. Tube 1 armed, flood valves aligned, gyro stabilized. The captain raised his hand, ready to give the order that could change the balance of the Pacific. Firing in 3, 2, he never reached 1. The intercept. At that exact moment, the submarine was hit, not by explosives, but by one of the most advanced pieces of US Navy technology, a low-power underwater impact pulse from a Mk-54 torpedo's proximity system. It detonated 200 yards off the submarine's bow, intentionally not on target. The shockwave wasn't enough to damage the hull, but it disrupted the launch mechanism. The YJ-18B missile jammed. Inside the submarine, alarms screamed. "Launch failed. System error. Torpedo guidance disrupted. The crew scrambled, steam vented from ruptured valves. Electrical smoke filled the forward compartment. The captain shouted, "Shut down Tube 1! Emergency ascent! Blow ballast!" The submarine lurched upward violently. Above, US forces watched the event unfold in real time. A sonar operator aboard the USS Thomas Hudner yelled, "Submarine is surfacing. Repeat, hostile submarine is surfacing." The surface showdown. 0455 hours. The Shang-class submarine erupted through the surface of the Philippine Sea, water spraying off its hull as it breached. It wasn't a surrender. It wasn't a sign of defeat. It was the last option the captain had to avoid destruction. Within moments, American warships surrounded it at a distance: the USS Pinckney, the USS Thomas Hudner, two MH-60R Seahawks hovering overhead, and the USS Ford looming in the distance, its entire air wing ready. The Shang-class was trapped. The submarine's captain opened the conning tower and stepped onto the deck, his crew watching in silence. He raised both hands. It was not a surrender gesture. It was a signal, a warning, a statement. "We will leave, but we will not forget." US forces monitored every move, but they did not fire, because the objective was achieved. The Chinese attack had been completely neutralized without a single American casualty. The aftermath. By 0520 hours, the submarine slowly turned east, limping away on the surface, too damaged to resubmerge safely. US ships kept distance, tracking until it exited the area. Later intercepted communications revealed that Beijing quietly ordered the submarine back to port, citing mechanical failure. But that was not the truth, according to US intelligence. The Chinese military attempted a covert attack on a US carrier and failed spectacularly. The world never heard about it, but the Pacific did, and so did every admiral in China's navy. In the Philippine Sea that morning, the US Navy sent a message more powerful than any missile. "You can stalk our carriers, you can target them, you can even open your torpedo tubes, but you will never get close enough to fire. Not today, not in this ocean, not while the US Navy rules the deep."